All right, everyone, welcome to week 13, last week of content. Um, I do a little more proper introduction in the next video, but this week's topics are permaculture, transition towns, and regenerative agriculture. These are in a lot of ways holistic integration of most of the concepts that we've talked about, if not all of them, this semester. So I do hope you enjoy the content. There's a lot of practical information in there. So, and a lot of these solutions just really make sense, um, sort of common sense if you really think about it. So, before that, I want to do a review of last week's content, which we did water sustainability. So we talked about dead zones. Remember, that's an area of low or no oxygen uh, in near the bottom of a body of water. Um, it's anoxic, anoxic, anoxic meaning lack of oxygen. And it's caused by eutrophication. Remember, eutrophication is just excess nutrients in the water. Um, the really important, I guess the connection here is how does eutrophication happen? And it's usually from runoff, from improper excessive fertilizer application on farms, also from overflows of city sewer systems and some other things. But those are the two main causes. And the problem is that you get these nutrients in the water and they just sort of drain with those river systems. And when one river system sort of when these different branches come together to form um, a larger stream or river, the the nutrients in there just sort of build up. And if you remember from the last presentation, there was that picture of the Mississippi watershed, and there's a huge dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi, which is where this huge, like 40% of the United States drains into that area. A lot of them are farms. There's definitely some urban areas as well. And so you get this giant dead zone outside of New Orleans in the middle of the Gulf or on the coast of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that, but um, and it's basically the size of New Jersey every year, which is really big. It's a seasonal thing. It happens like late summer. And if you think about the timing of that, that's when the agricultural runoff has had the time to sort of make its way down there. If you think about peak season and farming, it's going to be like in the mid to late summer, and that's when you get these dead zones. So this is not just a Louisiana or United States problem. There's dead zones all over the world. There's dead zones in other parts of the United States. So this is a really big problem that causes billions of dollars in lost revenue from especially fishing, but also recreational fishing and so forth. And so then we looked at privatization in general, which is just when you convert a public good to a private good. Remember, a public good is something that's owned by a group of people, everything from a community park to a national park in the United States to international waters where nobody really owns them. And so when you privatize something, you take that public good and you privatize it, which means you sell it off to a private individual or corporation, so forth. And so generally what happens with privatization, if you remember, there were examples in South Africa and Atlanta and Cochabamba. That is all um, different examples of water sources or water resources being privatized at different scales. So what happens? Well, the problem is, well, we look at the positives. Generally speaking, it's usually more efficiently used because now some individual has a profit motive to use it as much, uh, get as much profit off of it as possible. So, that's generally a good thing because you want these water resources to last. Um, the bad thing is it usually ends up with people getting fired or just having less jobs overall. It becomes more expensive, which means it's almost always more difficult to afford, especially for low-income people. All of those examples, there were situations in which lower income folks just couldn't afford water, and they had to decide between, putting food on the table and or paying their rent, and using water. So the rates basically always go up when you privatize a resource. Um, and so this is a big issue globally, not just for water, but for land. It's a really big one. If you think back to the neocolonialism lecture, I think that was week 4. Um, land grabs are happening all over the place, and this has happened historically. You look at if you've ever heard the term banana republic, that's a term that's used to refer to these countries in Central America, such as Guatemala and Honduras, even Costa Rica to some extent. And so that was in it was the 50s and 60s, maybe in the 40s, I can't remember, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. You had these lands, the vast lands that were um, basically not given to the banana companies. So United Fruit, I think, was the name of the company, um, and which is now Chiquita Banana. I'm sure you've heard of that. So they were given these sort of sweetheart contracts, cheap leases of vast swaths of land in these countries, and they used that money to gain political influence and so forth. The whole thing was very shady, and it's very really a black eye in the United States history. We supported this very actively. And so anyway, that was privatization. So this is not new. This has been happening since, sort of time immemorial, but it is something that is still happening. And water has been identified as a really potentially huge moneymaker for people, because as water resources become scarce, there's money to be made. That's the whole basis of the market, after all, this scarcity. And the scarcer something is, the more you can charge for it. And so this is a huge, there, there has been an identification of water resources as a major growth industry. So, and there's that whole debate which was brought up last week, should water be a human right? The United Nations does think so. They've declared water as a human right, or access to water. But when you have a private company that owns a resource, they can sell it to whomever they want at whatever price they want. And so that becomes a problem. And so Coach Obama is kind of the notorious example of what happens, where people protested, and unfortunately a young man was shot and killed. There were riots. I mean, clashes with the police and so forth. So they did actually get their water rights restored. The public good was given back to them. And so, it's tricky, right? Like, how do we balance the needs of people and nature with these private interests? I mean, we're all beneficiaries of this global economy. So, um, it's somewhat hypocritical if you're not careful to say, like, we should never privatize anything. Like, that's, a source of revenue that we all kind of, or most of us, benefit from, especially in these wealthy countries. So, how do we balance that, money interests with the needs of people and nature? It's a really important question that's only going to become more important as population grows and resources become more scarce. And then we had we read an article on this sort of like conflict between fracking and farming in terms of water use. The article was based out of what's happening in Colorado. This is a big issue in Colorado, so this is something that will probably pop up when we're out there. And feel free to, if it's sort of on topic, feel free to ask people about uh, any, aspects of this. Most likely they'll have some basis of opinion on the, sort of use of fracking. And there's, there's people on both sides, very much on both sides in Colorado. So a really big issue. But remember, fracking uses millions of gallons of water. They still don't have a good way to reuse that water because it's contaminated with um, chemicals, and also can get contaminated uh, radioactively. um, with low-level radiation that's under the ground. So right now they really can't reuse that water. So if you could reuse it, then, I mean, from a water sustainability perspective, then it's not a huge deal as long as you could reuse it. But you're just, first of all, you're going to lose millions of gallons that are just going to stay under the ground. But then the stuff you pull back up right now cannot be reused. So big issue. And then finally, we ended up talking about ocean acidification, which is sometimes called the evil twin of climate change, because it is due to the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is largely absorbed by the oceans. It's CO2, when absorbed in water, is acidic, and so it slowly lowers the pH of the ocean, and it has over time, which causes problems, especially for organisms that use these calcium-based shells and calcium-based structures. A really big one is coral. So coral is can be killed, or basically it can't thrive or even survive under when water is too acidic. And that's bad enough on its own, but coral is also where I can't remember the number, but a lot of our, a lot of fish that we rely on for seafood and so forth spends, especially the early part of their life, in coral. So it's a really key component of the marine ecosystem. So, and then of course other things like clams and mussels and so forth who have hard shells have issues with it as well. And so, yeah, that's a review of week 12. Again, this is another lesson where we could go any number of directions, and there's so much out there in terms of the sustainability and water resources that we don't have time to get to it all, but hopefully you're have a better sense of what we need to do and some of the issues with regards to the sustainability of water supplies, both domestically and internationally. Okay, I'll leave it at that and move on to the week 13 overview.